This is a bomb calorimeter. This is the actual piece of equipment that researchers use to calculate the energy content of either biodiesel or maybe even the potato chips that you had for lunch today. When they calculate the amount of energy, they're going to calculate it in heat units, which would either be joules or calories. I want you to look at the bomb calorimeter inside here. You can see that there's a silver bucket. Water goes all in here, and this is actually the bomb, is the smaller silver cylinder. What you do is put your fuel sample in there, then these two electrodes are connected to the bomb. These provide the spark that will ignite your sample when your sample burns or combusts, that gives off energy. So how is the energy collected, or how did a scientist figure out how much energy is being given off?
Current studies show that what goes on labels is an important consideration for manufacturers, since more than 70% of shoppers read food labels when considering whether to buy a product. A recent controversy as to whether labels on prepared foods should educate or merely inform the consumer is over, and a consumer group got its way. They had maintained that product labels should do more than simply list how many grams of nutrients a food contains. Their contention was that labels should also list the percentage of a day's total nutrients that the product will supply to the consumer, because this information is essential in planning a healthy diet.
Your body is composed of trillions of cells, lots of different types of cells that make up different organs and other parts of your body. Your body is also where 10 times that number of bacteria call home sweet home. But don't be afraid, these bacteria do more good than harm to you. And besides, just in case you wanted to strike up a conversation with your tenants, you and your bacteria do have a few things in common. All cells share some common characteristics that make them living things. All organisms are composed of cells, the basic fundamental unit of life. They contain DNA as a heritable genetic material, and they can reproduce. They transcribe DNA into RNA and translate RNA into proteins on ribosomes.
Implicit memory involves the unconscious retention of information acquired through experience, shaping our actions and reactions without conscious awareness. Explicit memory, on the other hand, pertains to deliberate and conscious recall of facts and events. These two memory types are governed by distinct brain systems, with implicit memory influencing skills and habits, while explicit memory supports learning, reasoning, and autobiographical recall. Both play crucial roles in shaping our behavior and understanding of the world.
Nissan will overhaul the inspection process for its Japan-destined vehicles for the first time in decades as the carmaker seeks to address a widening inspection scandal that has forced it to suspend production for the domestic market. The company said on Thursday that unauthorized workers had been certifying vehicles set for sale in the Japanese market. Even the company announced the recall of nearly 1.2 million cars earlier this month over the same issue, with investors increasingly concerned about Japan Inc.'s adherence to standards, concerns that were most recently inflamed by the Kobe steel data falsification scandal. The news pushed Nissan shares down 1.6% on Friday, and also on the prices of its suppliers.
Over the past 10 years, Australian overseas departures have grown from 1.7 million to 3.2 million. This represents strong average annual growth of 6.5%. This paper analyses outbound travel demand to each destination country using the travel demand models of short-term resident departures. The models are specified in terms of a double logarithmic linear functional form, with overseas departures as the dependent variable and real household disposable income prices of travel and accommodation in Australia, and overseas and the exchange as independent variables.
The last tourists may have been leaving the Valley of the Kings on the West Bank in Luxor, but the area in front of the tomb of Tutankhamun remained far from deserted. Instead of the tranquility that usually descends on the area in the evening, it was a hive of activity. TV crews trailed masses of equipment, journalists milled, and photographers held their cameras at the ready. The reason? For the first time since Howard Carter discovered the tomb in 1922, the mummy of Tutankhamun was being prepared for public display. Inside the subterranean burial chamber, Egypt's archaeology supremo Zahi Hawass, accompanied by 4 Egyptologists, 2 restorers and 3 workmen, was slowly lifting the mummy from the golden sarcophagus, where it has been rested mostly undisturbed for more than 3,000 years.
There isn't a financial director around who wouldn't like to accelerate cash flow by reducing debtor days, in other words, get customers to pay up faster. In Europe's top 1,000 quoted companies, nearly 1/4 of all invoices are unpaid at any point in time, according to recent research carried out by the ASF organization. This means they are sitting on a total of $274 billion overdue debt. Most of this is caused by poor collection practices. According to Jan Porter, ASF's managing director, you can set up all the systems you want, you can insist on water-light contracts and payment terms, the government can even introduce late payment legislation, but there are always some debtors who fail to pay on time.
Opportunity cost incorporates the notion of scarcity. No matter what we do, there is always a trade-off. We must trade off one thing for another because resources are limited and can be used in different ways. By acquiring something, we use up resources that could have been used to acquire something else. The notion of opportunity cost allows us to measure this trade-off. The opportunity cost of something is what you sacrifice to get it. Most decisions several alternatives. For example, if you spend an hour studying for an economics exam, you have 1 less hour to pursue other activities. To determine the opportunity cost of an activity, we look at what you consider the best of these other activities.
The emperor is the giant of the penguin world and the most iconic of the birds of Antarctica. Gold patches on their ears and on the top of their chest brighten up their black heads. Emperors and their closest relative, the king penguin, have unique breeding cycles, with very long chick-rearing periods. The emperor penguins breed the furthest south of any penguin species, forming large colonies on the sea ice surrounding the Antarctic continent. They are true Antarctic birds, rarely seen in the subantarctic waters, so that the chicks can fledge in the late summer season. Emperors breed during the cold, dark winter, with temperatures as low at 50 degrees Celsius and winds up to 200 kilometers per hour.
The importance of international studies and foreign language education for U.S. Economic and National Security Committee for Economic Development. To confront the 21st century challenges to our economy and national security, our education system must be strengthened to increase the foreign language skills and cultural awareness of our students. America's continued global leadership will depend on our students' abilities to interact with the world community both inside and outside our borders.
Formed a million years ago when low-density salt was pushed up through the much harder materials surrounding it, the Cardona Salt Mountain is one of the largest domes of its kind in the world, and unique in Europe. While small amounts of other minerals pervade the savory hill, the salt pile would have a near-translucent quality if not for the thin layer of reddish clay coating the exterior. The significance of the mountain was recognized as early as the Middle Ages when Romans began exploiting the mountain for its salt, which began to bolster the young Cardonian economy. With the invention of industrial mining techniques, a mine was built into the side of the mountain and a thriving facility formed at its base as excavators dragged enormous amounts of potash water-soluble salt from the innards of the hill.
Over many centuries and across many territories, the Romans were able to win an astonishing number of military victories, and their success was due to several important factors. Italy was a peninsula not easily attacked, there was a huge pool of fighting men to draw upon, a disciplined and innovative army, a centralized command and line of supply, expert engineers, effective diplomacy through a network of allies, and an inclusive approach to conquered peoples which allowed for the strengthening and broadening of the Roman power and logistical bases. Further, her allies not only supplied, equipped and paid for additional men, but they also supplied vital materials such as grain and ships. On top of all this, Rome was more or less in a continuous state of war or readiness for it and believed absolutely in the necessity of defending and imposing on others what she firmly believed was her cultural superiority.
Part of the fun of experimenting with granular materials, says Stephen W. Morris, is the showmanship. In one stunt that he has demonstrated in settings ranging from high school classrooms to television studios, the University of Toronto physicist loads clear plastic tubes with white table salt and black sand, and starts them rotating. What transpires in the tubes usually knocks the socks off of any unsuspecting bystander. Instead of mixing into a drab gray sameness, the sand particles slowly separate into crisp black bands cutting across a long, narrow field of salt. As the spinning continues, some bands disappear and new ones arise. It's a parlor trick, Morris says, not to deny its entertainment value. This demonstration of how strangely granular materials can behave is also an authentic experiment in a field both rich in fundamental physics and major practical consequences.
In 1959, the partial skeletal remains of an ancient woman estimated to be 10,000 years old were unearthed in Arlington Springs on Santa Rosa Island, one of the 8 Channel Islands off the Southern California coast. They were discovered by Phil C. Orr, curator of anthropology and natural history at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. The remains of the so-called Arlington Springs woman were recently reanalyzed by the latest radiocarbon dating techniques and were found to be approximately 13,000 years old. The new date makes her remains older than any other known human skeleton found so far in North America.
Bees need 2 different kinds of food. One is honey made from nectar, which actually is a fluid that is collected in the heart of the flowers to encourage pollination by insects and other animals. Secondly, come from pollen. It is fine powdery substance in yellow, consisting of microscopic grains discharged from the male part of a flower or from a male cone. It contains a male gamete that can fertilize the female ovule, which is transferred by wind, insects, or other animals. Let us go with the honeybee from her flower to the hive and see what happens. Most bees gather only pollen or nectar. As she sucks the nectar from the flower, it is stored in her special honey stomach ready to be transferred to the honey, making bees in alive.
Japan and China. At times, a broad stream of knowledge flowed from China to Japan. At other times, this transfer was halted from one side or the other, and Japan developed on its own. But whether in isolation or not, Japan was always itself. Everything that arrived from China was adapted to suit Japanese tastes and needs.
Since nutrition scientists are constantly making new discoveries, we need to revise our recommendations for healthy eating from time to time. However, nutrition is an art as well as science. It's an art because it requires creativity to develop a healthy eating plan for people who differ in their food preferences, beliefs, and culture, let alone in their nutritional needs according to their genes and life stage. As we discover more about how our genes and our environment interact, it's becoming increasingly difficult to provide a single set of dietary recommendations that will be suitable for everyone.
Our sense of cinema, as a site of commercial entertainment, can be traced back to the Lumiere brothers. In December 1895 they attracted a fee-paying public in Paris to sit and watch flickering images on an illuminated screen. The commercial Pandora's box they opened was to blossom in a few years in the world cinema industry, and, at its peak, the fantastical Hollywood. Yet in the 30 years in which this miraculous construction was accomplished, audiences rarely had to listen to films, only watch them. Hence, the early decades of cinema were characterized by the title silent. In fact, there was a lot of noise, machinery, audiences, musicians, and commentators. Even so, the absence of the human voice and dialogue make the films seem rather strange when viewed by a modern audience.
Recycling is the process of converting used materials into new products, reducing the need for raw resources and minimizing environmental impact. By collecting and processing items like paper, plastic, glass, and metal, recycling conserves energy, reduces pollution, and lowers greenhouse gas emissions. It's a crucial practice to promote sustainability and combat the depletion of natural resources. Everyone's participation in separating recyclables and supporting recycling programs contributes to a healthier planet and a more sustainable future.
When I enrolled in my master's course at Oxford last year, I had come straight from medical school with the decision to leave clinical science for good. Thinking back, I realized that I didn't put very much weight on this decision at the time. But today, I more clearly understand the consequences of leaving my original profession. When I meet old friends who are now physicians and surgeons, I sense how our views on medical problems have diverged. They scrutinize the effects of disease and try to eliminate or alleviate them. I try to understand how they come about in the first place. I feel happier working on this side of the problem, although I do occasionally miss clinical work and seeing patients.
For Professor David Phoenix, the Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology, the return of single honors chemistry is a master of credibility and pride. If you say you're a science faculty, you have to have all the core sciences, and this course will mean we attract a new supply of potential masters and Ph.D. students in chemistry. But he thinks that an attraction for students will be a teaching approach that differs significantly from his days as an undergraduate. This takes real-life issues as the starting point of lectures and modules, such as how drugs are made or the science behind green issues.
In the US, artists in the mid-1950s began to create a bridge to pop and a new style of art, strongly influenced by Dada and its emphasis on appropriation and everyday objects. Artists increasingly worked with collage, consumer products, and a healthy dose of irony. Jasper Johns re-imagined iconic imagery like the flag. Robert Rauschenberg employed silkscreen printings and found objects, and Larry Rivers used images of mass-produced goods. These three are considered to be the forerunners of American pop.
Allergies are abnormal immune system reactions to things that are typically harmless to most people. When you're allergic to something, your immune system mistakenly believes that this substance is harmful to your body. Substances that cause allergic reactions such as certain foods, dust, plant pollen, or medicines are known allergens. In an attempt to protect the body, the immune system produces antibodies to that allergen. Those antibodies then cause certain cells in the body to release chemicals into the bloodstream, one of which is histamine. The histamine then acts on the eyes, nose, throat, lungs, skin, or gastrointestinal tract and causes the symptoms of the allergic reaction. Future exposure to that same allergen will trigger this antibody response again. This means that every time you come into contact with that allergen, you'll have some form of allergy symptoms.
The foreign policy of a state, it is often argued, begins and ends with the border. No doubt an exaggeration, this aphorism nevertheless has an element of truth. A state's relationship with its neighbors, at least in the formative years, is greatly influenced by its frontier policy, especially when there are no settlers. Empire builders in the past sought to extend imperial frontiers for a variety of reasons: the subjugation of kings and princes to gain their allegiance, as well as handsome tributes for the coffers of the state, and the security of the core of the empire from external attacks by establishing a string of buffer state areas adjoining the frontiers. The history of the British Empire in India was no different. It is important to note in this connection that the concept of international boundaries between two sovereign states, demarcated and delineated, was yet to emerge in India under the Mughal rule.
Film is where art meets commerce. As Orson Welles said, a painter just needs a brush and the writer just needs a pen, but the producer needs an army. And an army needs money. A producer is just like an entrepreneur, we raise money to make films. First we need to find an original idea or a book or a play and purchase the rights. Then we need money to develop that idea, often a reasonably small sum. Besides, to commission a writer for the screenplay isn't something you would want to gamble your own money on, so you find a partner. We are lucky here in the UK, as we have Film, BBC Films and UK Film Council. All of these are good places to develop an idea. Producing in Britain is very different to producing in America or even Europe because the economic dynamic is different.
Language comes so naturally to us that it is easy to forget what a strange and miraculous gift it is. All over the world members of our species fashion their breath into hisses and hums and squeaks and pops and listen to others do the same. We do this, of course, not only because we like the sounds but because details of the sounds contain information about the intentions of the person making them. We humans are fitted with the means of sharing our ideas, in all their unfathomable vastness. When we listen to speech, we can be led to think thoughts that have never been thought before and that never would have occurred to us on our own.
Distance learning can be highly beneficial to a large variety of people, from young students wanting to expand their horizons to adults looking for more job security. With programs that allow learners of all ages to take courses for fun, personal advancement and degrees, distance learning can meet the needs of a diverse population. Perhaps one of the most notable and often talked about the advantages of distance learning is the flexibility. The majority of programs allow students to learn when and where it's convenient for them.
Learning to write well in college means learning, or relearning, how to write clearly and plainly. Now that doesn't mean that plainness is the only good style, or that you should become a slave to spare, unadorned writing. Formality and ornateness have their place, and in competent hands complexity can take us on a dizzy, breathtaking journey. But most students, most of the time, should strive to be sensibly simple to develop a baseline style of short words, active verbs and relatively simple sentences conveying clear actions or identities. It's faster. It makes arguments easier to follow, it increases the chances a busy reader will bother to pay attention, and it lets you focus more attention on your moments of rhetorical flourish, which I do not advise abandoning altogether.
The process of delegation comprises the decision to delegate, the briefing, and the follow-up. At each of these points, anticipate the potential problems. When you delegate, you are not delegating the right to perform an action, you are delegating the right to make decisions. It is important to be flexible, as the person to whom you delegate may have a better and faster way of completing a job than you. Overall responsibility for a delegated task remains with you. It is helpful to others if you can provide constructive/positive feedback on their performance.
One distinguishing feature of business is its economic character. In the world of business, we interact with each other not as family members, friends, or neighbors, but as buyers and sellers, employers and employees, and the like. Trading, for example, is often accompanied by hard bargaining, in which both sides conceal their full hand, perhaps engage in some bluffing, and a skilled salesperson is well versed in the art of arousing a customer's attention sometimes, by a bit of puffery to clinch the sale. Still, there is an ethics of trading that prohibits the use of false or deceptive claims and tricks such as baitans which advertise
The nightjar's soft plumage and variegated coloring help it blend in with its surroundings, but it is the bird's own judgment in choosing the most sympathetic background that makes it a camouflage champion. Each bird chooses where to nest based on its specific patterns and colors, says camouflage researcher Martin Stevens, of the Centre for Ecology and Conservation at the University of Exeter in Cornwall. Each individual bird looks a little bit different, he says. This is not a species-level choice. Individual birds consistently sit in places that enhance their own unique markings, both within a habitat and at a fine scale with regards to specific background site.
The United Nations is an international organization founded in 1945. Due to its unique international character and the powers vested in its founding charter, the organization can take action on a wide range of issues and provide a forum for its 193 member states to express their views. Through the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council and other bodies and committees. The work of the United Nations reaches every corner of the globe. Although best known for peacekeeping, peacebuilding, conflict prevention, and humanitarian assistance, there are many other ways the United Nations and its system, special agencies, funds, and programs affect our lives and make the world a better place.
Arbitration is a method of conflict resolution which, with more or less formalized mechanisms, occurs in many political and legal spheres. There are two main characteristics to arbitration. The first is that it is a voluntary process under which two parties in conflict agree between themselves to be bound by the judgment of a third which has no other authority over them. The judgment, however, is not legally binding. The second is that there is usually no clear body of law or set of rules that must apply. The arbitrator is free, subject to any prior agreement with the conflicting parties, to decide on whatever basis of justice is deemed suitable. Arbitration has been used successfully, for example, to decide on disputed borders between Israel and Egypt, where local history was a major part of the arbitrator's decision.
In the 250 years of its active evolution, funerary violin moved from the formal to the personal. It is clear from the earliest accounts of the form that its role during the 16th and 17th centuries was largely heraldic, to exemplify the continuity of the social structure. The few works that have survived from this period have been surprisingly unemotional and at times overtly grandiose.